What's up, guys?
Hey, it's Patrick. How you doing, bud?
Good, man. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you came on. So
Sure.
we're going to talk a little bit. And everybody who's watching, we're here today with Patrick Hickey Jr. He is the author of the minds behind the game series.
Yep, which will also include it's starting out with the adventures, stories about developers and their development of certain games, as well as you have sports games and a soon coming shooter games, which there's a certain game I saw that you reviewed. I'm very interested to know.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a wild ride the past 2.5 years. Like, yeah, 3 books in basically 3 years. The minds behind the games, the minds behind the adventure games, the minds behind the sports games. Three more coming.
Oh,
It's been
Oh,
wild.
wow. So we'll start like at the beginning. I know your first published work was in 2018, but my understanding is you began writing well before that. Can you tell me how that kind of steamrolled and like what the process was like in saying I want to get published, I want to take the next step? Like, tell us a little bit about that.
I mean, my first book was in 2018, but like before that, I mean, easily over 10,000 articles for Examiner, NBC. I contributed to the Syracuse Post Standard, the New York Times, the New York Daily News. So it was just like I had never written a book. I was a journalist that had never written a book. And I think it was just I got really comfortable teaching. I'm a full-time college professor, and I was just really comfortable. And then it got to the point where my wife was like 5 months pregnant, and I'm like, I need to start doing some shit that I always wanted to do before my daughter is born. And one of them was write a book. And I love doing interviews, and I love history, and I love video games. So it just all melded into one. And I started contacting developers, and what do they say? The rest is history.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So I imagine like with the process when you're going through like making all these titles, what's a little bit like at the creative end because you have to be working all of them at the same time. I imagine because you can't just get a hold of someone when you need to right away. You have to kind of put your feelers out when you're like, I'm interested in getting in touch with so and so. Like, how does that work?
So the first book was me sending out hundreds of pitches to developers and not knowing if they were going to get back to me. My first book. So it's hard for somebody to invest in you when they don't know if you're investable, you
Yeah.
know. Luckily, I had a nice collection of sources from my days at NBC and Review Fix and things like that, so that definitely helped. But then what happened was when I was working on the sequel to The Minds Behind the Games, I pitched it as a sequel to my publisher, and I was like, the first book had 36 games. So I was like, let's do a sequel, and we'll have like 45. And they went, no. And I went, okay. And they were like, because I showed them everything that I had done so far, and they were like, "You're crazy. You've got like at least 3 books here." They're like, if you do a little bit more work, you've got minds behind the adventure games, minds behind the sports games, minds behind the shooter games. Like, and I'm like, no, no, I want to do a sequel. And my wife was like, they want to brand you, stupid. Like
Yeah.
they want to build with you. And I was just like, yeah, you know what? That's probably the best thing. So I was basically writing the minds behind the games, the minds behind the minds behind adventure games, minds behind the sports games, and minds behind the shooter games, all at the same time. Just like whenever somebody would get me answers back, I would just fill it in.
Yeah.
So, and then what happened was, I got so used to writing like 2 or 3 books at the same time. By the time I was finished with the adventure and the sports, I was only doing the shooter book, and I felt like the biggest piece of crap inside. I'm like, I'm only writing one book. So then I started the minds behind the Sega Genesis games, and
Yeah, I kind
that
of see that you've hinted at that quite a bit, like on your
yeah,
social media.
and it took off. Like I started it in December, probably like a week before Christmas,
Uh-huh.
and by April I had 40 games like confirmed. So
Uh,
it's the biggest book I've ever done so far. And so then my wife gave birth to my second child, my son, in May. So probably like a week before my son was born, I'm like, the shooter book is done. So now I'm only working on one book again. Now I feel like a piece of shit again. So I'm like, you know what? Sony PlayStation was the system that affected me the most as a kid. So a week before my son was born, I started writing that, and I mean, I got answers for like Jet Moto and Twisted Metal while my wife was in labor. I wrote the Parasite Eve chapter in the waiting room while she was in labor.
You know what's funny about the
Wow.
PlayStation, Patrick, is that like I heard something recently and it rang so true, and that's that when you ask people what like they liked about the Nintendo 64, you always kind of get the same conglomerate of answers: the Ocarina of Time, GoldenEye, Mario Kart,
Yep.
Mario 64.
Obviously.
Then you ask somebody about PlayStation, you get a different answer every time.
Yep.
It's like that's the thing. Like you got what you got from 64, but PlayStation was just
Because there was
Wow.
just so many amazing, like there was great first party games for the PlayStation, but the third party games were just as awesome. Like, I mean, can you imagine the PlayStation without Ridge Racer, Air
Yeah.
Combat, Tekken, Crash Bandicoot? You know, like there was a lot of companies that were coming out of nowhere. Insomniac, you know, Single Track, like it was great. It's great.
Yeah.
And
then you even have the major companies like Capcom coming out with like Resident Evil early in the PlayStation and
Yep.
stuff. It's killing it. So
Tomb Raider. I mean, oh, the list goes. There's so many good like 2D fighters. There's so many good 3D fighters. There's so many, and not in the
Let me ask you
beginning.
a question, Patrick.
Mhm.
If you're working on this PlayStation 1, was there a particular PlayStation game like you gunned for immediately? Because everyone's got like that PlayStation 1 game. Which like, was there one for you when you were like, I'm making this book, like I better first person I like got to reach out to?
So I definitely wanted to get an NHL game.
Yeah. Okay.
I definitely wanted to get Twisted Metal.
Of course.
I definitely wanted to get Jet Moto.
Nice.
I definitely wanted to get Crash Bandicoot.
Absolutely.
I definitely wanted to get Parasite Eve.
Underrated game, and that game's not talked about enough, in my opinion. That game is actually crazy.
Some of the sexiest cutscenes in video game history.
Yes.
You know, that have aged beautifully.
Yeah.
But yeah, those are pretty much, and they're all in already. So I've already got.
Hell yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so I've only been working on the book for 4 months, and I've already got 30 confirmed, like written chapters.
Wow.
And I've got like another 20 that have told me that they're going to give me answers. Yes, Bushido Nerd is one of my buddies. He's one of my buddies in the Retro Game Mafia. It's a community that I run on Instagram, and so they know all the little like updates. But Siphon Filter is featured in the book. So that's Tomb Raider 2 is featured in the book. Spider-Man, Neversoft Spider-Man is featured in the book. So I'm like super happy with the direction that's going.
People, we all talk about the open world Spider-Man game on the PS4, but no one really talks about those PS1 titles like Enter the Electro.
Yeah.
And the first Spider-Man, like I actually really enjoyed those when they came out.
There was so much unlockable content in there too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
all the costumes.
Good to us then. I mean, today comparison. Yeah, you're not going to age the best, but I'll take it.
Absolutely.
So, one other thing, and I mean, I don't know, because I know the book isn't out yet, but one of my favorite PC shooters of all time is Deus Ex. And I believe you covered that. Is that correct?
In this guy right here.
Yeah. Oh, see, I need to read that because I would love to hear stories about the development of it, like anything, inspiration that they got behind it, because, like, I actually just was playing that about a week ago just for fun. Like, that's one first-person shooter game that no matter how long it's been, since, 20 years old now?
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Amazing game still to this day.
I was
when Deus Ex came out.
I was super lucky that when I was at NBC, Epic Mickey had just come out, and the people at NBC did not know really anything about video games, and they were like, "Oh, this Epic Mickey game is coming out. Do you want to interview them?" And I'm like, "Sure," because I knew Warren Spector was attached to it, you know, and it's like,
definitely.
he's one of the, you know, he's great. So we did an interview. He was awesome. I wrote a really solid article. So then fast forward 8 or 9 years, and I'm starting these books. So I'm just like, I message him, and I'm like, Warren, I'm working on a book. I want to talk to you about Deus Ex. And he was like, sure. So then when we did the adventure book, I was like, can we revisit Mickey? So we could put Mickey in the minds behind the adventure games.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah, I was this close to getting him for System Shock. But the team was so big for that game, and he was just like, I'll talk to you. He goes, but you're not going to be able to get the whole story from me. So unless you can get like 3 or 4 other people, I'm not going to talk. So I was like, all right, that's cool. I respected that. And I could only get like one other person. So I just kind of like dropped it. But Warren Spector is an amazing developer. Deus Ex, without Deus Ex, you don't have like Fallout 3. You don't have so many great, you don't have BioShock.
Nope.
You know, so such a good game. So being able to protect the development story of that game is super important to me. So
I can't wait to read it because that's something I would love to just be able to find, just get to know what happened on the other side.
it's one of my favorite development stories in the first book.
Nice.
So
Even more excited.
All right, so I got a question for you, Patrick.
Sure.
Of all the developers you've had a chance to interview, do you have like a story that comes to mind in terms of like just did not expect it to go where it went? Like, let's just spill the beans a little bit.
Absolutely.
They're all going to go.
So I just want to say that like all of the stories in here are all good. Like there are a couple of chapters that didn't make it into some of these books where I was just like, yeah, this ain't gonna happen. Like you didn't give me anything that I needed. Like I can't put this in a book. But man, I remember sitting down with Michael Brook, who was the assistant producer on like Earl Weaver Baseball for like the PC, but he also did NHL hockey, NHL PA 93, NHL 94, the original Madden,
Wow.
like all the games that I grew up playing, you know?
Yeah.
And we're sitting in a lobby in a hotel in New York City, and we're just chilling out, like looking out into like, you know, and he starts telling me the story of the original John Madden football for the Genesis.
Nice.
So I'm not sure if you guys know this or not, but the Madden on the Genesis is not the original Madden. It was supposed to be
something like that. But
it was supposed to be like EA, like arcade football.
Ah, yes.
But what happened was Trip Hawkins and Robin Antonick did the original Madden on PC, and they were trying to port it over to the Genesis. And Madden on the PC did not sell well at all.
Really?
Like John Madden himself called it an abortion. And it wasn't fun. It was like an old school kind of like football sim, you know? Lots of data, not a lot of gameplay. The frame rate was awful. So EA is trying to get back in the black, and they're trying to make money, and they see this arcade football game, and they're like, whoa, this is really good. If we talk to Madden and get him to take a lower royalty rate, and we put his name on this, we can make all our money back. So they talk to Madden, and he agrees. So that's cool. So what happens later, this is a really cool part, is now I'm not sure if you know this, but Electronic Arts basically backwards engineered the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Genesis.
Really?
And they were making their own carts.
You're talking about, the yellow backing. Yeah.
Yep. And they were saving tons of money. And they were just basically going around Nintendo and going around Genesis and making their own carts.
It's like the equivalent of like a Tengen cart, basically.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, too, if you know your video game history, Don Traeger, who was the voice of Paperboy in the arcade, and he was a producer at Atari, he actually became one of the founding fathers of Electronic Arts, EA Sports. So all of those people like Lisa Ching, all those people from Tengen that were geniuses, backwards engineering shit, all went to EA. So what happens is now Sega has to approve like every game that gets approved for the Genesis. So even though EA was making their own carts and they backwards engineered the games, Sega still had to approve the game for it to be licensed on the Genesis. So Sega plays Madden and is like, yo, this is really good. This is better than our football game. Why don't we buy this game off of you, and then we don't sue you for backwards engineering our console?
Fair trade.
So Michael Brook, this is all in, and I'm sorry for shameless plugging, but this is all in the minds behind the sports games.
Plug away, man.
Michael Brook is like this 24-year-old assistant producer on Madden. The producer at the time, I'm pretty sure his name is Rich Hellman. He was on vacation at the time.
Okay.
So now Michael Brook looks at Trip Hawkins, the head of EA and eventually the founder of 3DO, and is like, no. So he goes, this is what we'll do. We'll help you with your football game, but we're not giving up our football game. So what happens is Sega, and this football game is Joe Montana football, the original Joe Montana football.
Oh, okay.
So what happens is Sega plays Madden, they love it. So what they do is now they fire the entire Joe Montana football development staff.
Oh, man. Holy
EA finishes it. Gets no credit.
Really?
But now EA has to say to themselves, all right, listen, Sega's letting us release our game on their console. That's great. They're not suing us. But we can't make their game better than ours.
Yeah.
So now they're trying to like kind of. So what happens is they're trying to make the game sexy though because they want to appease Sega. So they end up programming in the first football game to have instant replay.
Oh wow.
But what happens is after they program it in, they're like, shit, this works like really good. This could make people buy Joe Montana football instead of John Madden.
Oh boy.
So they're like a couple of days away from like releasing Joe Montana football, from giving Sega the final build. And Sega's like, well, what's holding you guys back? And Michael Brook is fucking genius. He's like, everything else is good. We fixed everything. Everything's great. But that instant replay thing is just really buggy. It's holding us back. So then Sega's like, okay, so then just drop it. And they ended up putting it in Madden 2.
Like, I don't want this to go there. I want. It's like what I imagine.
Yep. So that's just like one story. So I remember him telling me this. I'm sitting next to him and him telling me this, and I'm just like, this.
My God, yeah.
And I'm like, you never told anybody this story before? And he's like, Trip Hawkins told it once, like 5 or 6 years ago. He goes, but it wasn't on. I went home like right after. I looked online. It wasn't online anywhere.
Wow.
And I'm just like, yes. Oh, so that's like one story that kind of like comes to mind. That's just like got no credit. But EA not only created like the landmark sports franchise, EA Sports, but they also controlled the competition.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that. It's like, I don't know, it's so weird hearing that the same development team is making 2 football games that are supposed to compete with each other. Like,
well then see too, the same thing too. Michael Brook, again, one of the most intelligent people I've ever come across in video games. He was a producer at EA, and he did like Madden, he did NHL and stuff. And then what ended up happening was he saw how much money all of these developers were making on royalties. So he leaves EA as a producer and goes to work at another company and basically is making NHL 95 for Electronic Arts, but then making NFL 95 for Sega.
Oh my God, holy
So he's working for and against EA and for and against Sega. He was like a triple agent.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's like a double agent or something, where he's just on both sides. It's like nobody knows who he's really playing for.
Yeah, crazy. So crazy stories back then. Stuff like that will never ever happen again.
No way. Yeah, no, with the contracts, privacy, all that kind of stuff. All those loopholes are not getting opened up again.
So let's talk about modern gaming a little bit. As far as systems like that you collect and for retro, we'll talk retro actually. So I want to ask you about this. What system are you like most into as far as collecting it? I've seen like the stuff you post on social media. It seems like you have a pretty big collection of a lot of games. But is there one that you like focus in on the most in terms of like what you would drop top dollar on?
No, not really. Like I have over 3,000 games. Across probably like 25, 30 consoles. Right now I'm at the point where I just buy games that I think have a story. So it's like I'm the type of person that looks in instruction manuals for names and stuff like that, and I'll be like, oh, the producer of this game was actually the developer of this game, blah, blah, blah. And it's happened several times where I'll be in a video game store and I'll pick up a game that'll be like $8, and the guy will be like, why do you want this? And I'm just like, well, the guy that made this actually made this. And then like a week later, the same game is like $17 over there.
Yeah, you just gave the info to raise the price.
Yep. So I have pretty much every game I want. So I buy stuff that like tickles my fancy, and then I have an RG350, which I can pretty much emulate everything from the PS1 down. Yeah. And that's my research device.
I was just gonna say. Well, you get a good Raspberry Pi or whatever.
Yep.
Similar concept.
Yeah.
And you just go with it.
Yeah, because I mean, even I'm a collector too, but nowhere of that level. I probably only got like 600 games out of maybe like 20, 15 consoles. Anyway, and I always, as a collector, you first initially start going for what you want, like you were saying, but then it stops becoming about that. You eventually just start going for everything and just going like, doot, 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 and all of a sudden you have like games you're thinking of where you look at and like, I'm never going to play that, but I
Oh
own
yeah.
it. It's just, so you'd be surprised.
The market changes so much too. Like I noticed probably like 3 months ago, the market for GameCube is like completely fucking different.
Yep.
And like people are buying a 1,000-year door. Their first Animal Crossing release.
Well,
I've just seen that, like, because I've been rebuying games from, like, the GameCube, PS3, and Wii era, especially Wii. If y'all are buying Wii games, and you're getting them at a steal right now. They're just so cheap. Like,
Absolutely.
the best Wii games are dirt cheap right now on
Mm-hmm.
the eBay's market. Then you have games like GameCube. I don't know why, but the market just changed when quarantine happened. You have, like, the hugest hike in prices of those classics, especially, like, Sunshine, which, you know, Nintendo's not stupid. They're completely tapped into their audience. And they're like, they're aware of when to release this game. They're doing it this Friday, actually. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So, the market's so crazy how much it changes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's like one of my buddies runs a video game store. It's not too far away from my house. I'm in there like every couple of days just shooting the shit. And it's like Def Jam Vendetta and Fight for New York all of a
So
sudden.
expensive.
And like Baldur's Gate Dark
Yeah,
Alliance.
it went up a
I
lot.
had both of those. So
Guys,
I know they were
true
valuable.
story, I actually played that game with Method Man in Boynton Beach, Florida at a GameStop. He did a tour called the
Wow.
Def Jam Vendetta Tour. And I got to sit down with him. He was wearing a freaking shower cap, Phillies jersey. I'll never forget it. But that game did go up. I did see that. That's like one of those ones that for some reason people have nostalgia for.
It's like $85 all of a sudden. I'm just like,
yeah.
Really?
I
It's
love
an
it.
okay game. It's just
Yeah.
like, I don't know if it's $85. You know, it's crazy how much
It's
the
not
market
85 to me now. Like, that wouldn't be. Anyone want to buy it? No, I'm kidding. It's like, I didn't even know. I just learned that now that actually hiked in price. I had no clue that was even up.
Did you decide what you're gonna do with your pole position sealed copy?
I'm not gonna open it. Yeah. I'm not
No,
gonna open
no.
it. I'm just gonna
Keep it
leave it.
sealed.
Yeah. I have hundreds of
Pole
sealed games.
position's good on so many things, but the Atari pretty much, in my opinion. You know what I mean? The Atari just wasn't great for arcade ports. It's funny that you have, because I don't have any like old sealed vintage games in my that I can think of. Maybe the only one I can think of that I do have is I have a copy of E.T. on Atari.
Yeah.
I still have it sealed, and that's just a novelty. I don't want to fucking touch that. You know,
Yeah.
that's completely novelty. But as far as modern gaming, what are you into?
The
Like I saw
PS4,
you got
the
new
Switch.
Tony Hawk, right?
Yes. Yeah, I got a review code for Tony Hawk. It's so good.
It is.
I grew up playing those. Tony Hawk 3 is in this one. So,
Nice.
and like to me, Tony Hawk is like one of the closest games to perfect as you can, like, you know, and I run a site, reviewfix.com, and I don't like to review games anymore. But if I had to rate Tony Hawk 3, like it's as close to 10 as a game can possibly be, you know? Like
No, it's a perfect title. I think the original trilogy on PlayStation, they each added more and more, and it's like the way you do sequel. And then I even think the new one's the way you do a remaster. They didn't have to add too much, but they like sharpened everything that was already existing.
Yep.
I think that was a great way to approach it.
So I've had so much fun playing that. On the Switch, mostly Outer Worlds, Animal Crossing, stuff like that. But I pre-ordered, which I rarely do. I rarely like pre-order anything. The WWE Battlegrounds game because
Isn't it like WrestleFest?
it's kind of like WrestleFest, but the same developer, Saber Interactive, they did NBA Playgrounds, and that's actually a really fun arcade basketball game. And I wanted to support them because they gave me review codes for the first two games. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna buy the WWE game because they've done enough for me. They've given me enough free stuff. So I'm really eager to see how it's gonna be. So
yeah, no, I was gonna say it's definitely interesting because. I mean, it's also nice to see WWE games going in a little bit of a different direction because it's just been so cookie cutter for like the past 10 that anything new, I'm down. Like so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, wrestling needs a whole change in general right now, but yes.
So your book is in 5 of the top major colleges. I want to hear about it. You gotta tell me.
So that's one of the reasons why I decided to go with McFarland because they're really good at getting books into college libraries.
Okay.
And I really feel like these are books that like 25 years from now are going to mean a lot more than they mean right now. It's funny because the sports book and the adventure book are selling well, but I get emails and messages from people every day on Instagram, on Facebook that have no idea that I exist, and they're just like, oh, and they buy the first book. You know, and I have nothing against the first book. I love the first book, but like the sports book and the adventure book are written so much better. But it's like super cool that my publisher is just there. They have a skill at just getting books into big ass libraries.
Doesn't it feel weird to know like there's someone out there who's like reading that book or using it for their research for their own paper at like school or something?
It's so crazy. It's like I would say 4 months after the first book came out, because I search online all the time to see where the book's getting picked up and stuff. And Stanford has like a game design course, and one of my books is required reading. And I was just
Really?
like,
That's gotta be mind blowing.
yeah, I was just like, boom, and I've taught college for 15 years, and and I'm full time. I have tenure and stuff like that. And a lot of my coworkers are just very, oh, you write about video games, and now it's just kind of like I'm in Stanford, University of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Harvard, so UCLA, UC Berkeley. So it's kind of like, can you take me serious now?
Yeah, seriously.
So, but they don't. But that's okay. That's all right.
Yeah.
I like being the feisty underdog. So.
Well, dude, on top of all the stuff you just named, you're like a jack of all trades because you also do voiceover work.
The way
Wanna
that
talk a little
happened.
bit about that?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
pretty exciting. And like, when did you start doing that? Was that recent?
No, well, see, the thing is, it was recent, but like, I'm a kid of the '90s, so like, I've always made prank phone calls,
Yeah.
and I've always done voices and stuff like that, and people were always like, "You should do voiceover. You should do voiceover," and I just didn't know how. I've interviewed voice actors before, like Dana Snyder, who was Master Shake on Aqua Teen Hunger
Yeah, on
Force,
Aqua Teen.
Nice.
and Allison Packard, who does Jibanyan on Yokai Watch and stuff, but I never crossed that line because I never wanted to be that journalist. Because I've interviewed so many people that were like, "Oh, well, how do I write a book?" Like after the interview, and I'm like, "That's like mega unprofessional." So it's like,
How do I write a book?
yeah, like
Get out of here.
after the interview, they're like, "Oh, how do I do this?" And I'm just like, So I never wanted
Like, how
to
do you
ask a
organize
voice.
your data, Patrick? Can you explain that?
Yeah, it's
How
like
do you
what
know
size,
what you do so I can do it?
like what size waist are you, Patrick?
Who should I hit up, Patrick?
So I got super lucky. So what happened was after the first book came out, I started working on Review Fix again. And I never stopped working on Review Fix. I've never stopped working on Review Fix for 10 years. But one of the things that I like to do on Review Fix is interview indie game developers. So I just go down up and down hashtags on Instagram and Twitter and stuff like that. And I look for games. And I found this game, and it looked kind of like Minecraft, was like really solid lighting, like dark. And it was basically like this Catholic priest getting like bitch slapped by a tree. And I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. And there was like thunder in the background and rain. So I messaged the developer and I'm like, I'd love to interview you guys for my site. So we do the interview, everything goes well. I find out I'm like the first person to ever interview them.
Really?
Yeah, like they're from Bulgaria, super nice guys, small team, 6 guys. So then they go, do you want to play the beta? And I'm like, sure. So I play the beta, and the first line in the game is, it's been a week since the disappearance of Cardinal Benedictus. So week, W-E-E-K, right?
Yeah.
It was spelled W-E-A-K. So I messaged them, and I'm like, guys, like this is supposed to be like a point-and-click like survival horror game. Your text is like incredibly important. If there's a typo in the first sentence of the game, like you're fucked.
You're done.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, what do we do? And I'm like, well, I'm an English and journalism professor. If you want me to edit all of your dialogue, I'll do it. So we came up with a price, and they sent me like 2,000 lines of dialogue.
Oh wow.
And I just went through it in the same day.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I'm not fucking around. Same day,
Yeah.
boom, I send it back to them. They pay me. Then like 2 weeks later, they send me like 4,000 lines.
Oh,
And I'm
wow.
like, oh, so this is like they're like, yeah, you're the story editor. And I'm like, wow, okay. So I do that. So then like every couple of days they give me more stuff, and I'm loving it because this is like my first paying gig on a video game.
Seriously.
And
Yeah.
and this is when I just started. I just handed in the manuscript for the first book, and I started working on the second book.
All of this
So-
based off of like trying to reach out to them to talk.
Yep.
Turned into that.
Yep. So wait, it gets even cooler because
That's insane.
so what happens is now we're going to Kickstarter, and they're like, we want you to write and edit the entire Kickstarter campaign. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, all right, let's do this. So they wrote it, and then I cleaned it up and tightened and stuff like that. And then they're like, we're screwed. I'm like, what? What's the matter? What's up, Derek? Derek just called me a sexy beast. So I'm just like, what's the matter? And they're like, the voice actor just quit. And well, to be honest, his voice didn't really fit the game. I'm like,
Throwing it out
it's supposed to be a scary like homage to Alone in the Dark.
Oh, okay.
And the guy sounds like Russell Brand.
Okay.
It's just like, like a wacky Englishman, like, wow. And I'm just like, So they're like, what are we going to do? And I'm like, I could do a voice. And they're like, really? And I'm like, mm-hmm. So I go in my man cave and I'm just like, oh my God. What did I just do?
Yeah.
What did I just say? So I've always been good at that movie trailer voice. My wife hates it. She's right here. She hates that voice. Like the in a world, one man, one tortilla. Like she hates it. But I'm like, I can't do that voice in the game because it'll just be ridiculous. It's supposed to be a scary game,
Mhm.
So this guy had an English accent. So I'm like, so what if I combine the English accent that this guy had with that dark, bassy voice?
So a bloke came across this dark English voice. My name is Alexander, and I am the Padre. I'm walking through this dark mansion.
And they fucking ate it up.
Really? Yes.
And they were like, can you go record everything? Like right now. And I'm like, all right. And I'll never forget it because my throat was on fire. I was like coughing up blood by the time that I was finished. But within like 4 hours, the build was updated and I had a new beta and my voice was in it. And I was just like,
Crazy.
so we ended up not getting funded on Kickstarter. So that sucked. But then like 3 months later, we signed with Feardemic and they published the first game on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, and Switch.
Okay.
And now we're working on the sequel, and the sequel is going to be out next year. And so the first game's like a point-and-click survival horror game. But the sequel, the Padre One Shell Straight to Hell, is basically like Smash TV with like tower defense elements. It's so freaking cool.
Oh,
It's so
wow.
fast-paced and fun. So yeah, so it's cool. So now I'm like the main character of a game, and then I ended up I'm writing the story right now for a game that's being animated by the former senior animator of BioShock Infinite, Pete Paquette.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
shit.
so what
That's
happened was
exciting.
this was crazy. This was probably like 2 years ago. He messages me on Facebook, and he's like, "Is this Patrick Hickey, the author of The Minds Behind the Games?" And I'm like, is this Pete Paquette, the animator who worked on Gladius and BioShock Infinite? And he goes, how the fuck do you know who I am? And I'm like, how do you know who I am?
Yes.
And we started talking. And he invited me on his podcast. And at the end of the podcast, he was like, if you ever want to do more work in video games, let me know. And like right away, I'm like, I'm letting you know.
Yeah.
So then, like,
You know.
So then, like 2 weeks later, he messages me, and we have this conversation. And he's like, I kind of have this idea for a game. And he gives me, like, this skeleton for a story. And he's just like, okay. He goes, I want you to fill in all the back lore, like, create the world that this game will exist in. And I'm just like, oh, my God.
Oh no.
But I did it. The name of the game is Kroom, Kroom. You can go to kroomgame.com. It's really cool. It's basically like Akari Warriors and Contra had sex with the original Legend of Zelda.
Really?
Okay.
So it's the same view as the original Legend of Zelda, but it's a shooter. It's so much fun. The story, for me anyway, because I wrote the story, I would say is like loosely like influenced by games like Cave Story, Celeste. So
Ooh, Celeste, yeah.
it's a lot of fun.
Great. I love that game.
So we're working on that. I just did voiceover for Tony Barnes' new game, Run, Die, Run Again, which just got announced. Tony Barnes, if you guys don't know who Tony Barnes is, he's the assistant producer on Desert Strike, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike,
Oh,
Nuclear
wow.
Strike.
You're
Buffy
doing
the
a PlayStation book, so like you had to have spoken with that guy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Tony is writing the foreword to the Genesis book too. So
Okay.
so yeah, and that's basically like a first person platformer. So it's like imagine if Super Meat Boy was first person,
Oh,
That's,
wow.
that's crazy.
and it's got this amazing like kind of like techno electronica soundtrack. So I'm the narrator in the game. So I'm just like,
Run.
you know. So like
How cool is that?
the trailer is nuts. So yeah, it's been the last 3 years have been like the craziest 3 years of my life, and it all started from like I had a conversation with somebody, where I wanted their help to do something like really cool, and they were like, no. So I told them, I was like, and this person was like a mentor to me and shit, and I was just like, well, then I'm gonna write a book. And he just looked at me and he's just like, well, then go write a book, kid. And 3 weeks later, I had a publishing deal.
Wow.
So,
Holy shit.
so yeah, I tell people all the time, like, I'm the last person you ever want to say, like, you can't do this.
I was
or
about to say,
oh,
like,
yeah.
brick
So-
wall after brick wall, it feels like that you're going to have to deal through it. You're just running right through it.
It's like, well, it's funny that you said that too, because I remember, like, when I when I interviewed for NBC, like this was like 2011, and I'm sitting in there, and there's people from NYU, Columbia, Mizzou, and I went to the CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, which is a great school, but it's not, Ivy League or whatever. And I'm sitting in there in the interview, and they're like, what makes you different from all the people that are waiting outside? And I looked the guy right in the face, and I was like, because I'll run through a fucking wall for this place. And he just went like that. And he's like, we'll call you in 2 weeks. And I went home to my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I was like, oh, they said they'll call me back in 2 weeks. And my wife was like, well, we'll see,
Yeah.
And 10 days later, they called me. They're like, can you come in on Wednesday? I'm like, I can come in right now. And they're like, no, you can come in on Wednesday.
That's amazing.
So yeah.
Man, you're a guy who can get it done. Just like give you an objective, you will
just trying, yeah. So
before we let you go, Patrick, can you tell us, you want to plug any upcoming future projects that we can expect from you?
Yeah, sure. So the Minds Behind the Shooter games is supposed to be out in November, December. And that's probably like up to this point the best work that I've done so far. So like we're talking Soldier of Fortune, Halo 3, Star Fox, Sinistar, Chiller, like we're talking arcade shooters, first person shooters, third person shooters. Like the list of games that I've gotten in this book is awesome. And then the Sega book is going to be great. The PlayStation book is coming along well. Hopefully, I mean, I have a couple of NDAs, so there's a couple of games that I can't discuss, but if all goes well, like from November on, we're talking basically like I have like 3 more books coming and at least 3 more video games that I have credits on being released. So I'm hoping 2021 is going to be like a big year for me.
Yeah, so. That Genesis one is actually something I'm intrigued in. There's one game, though, if you could try to guess the developers, because I'd love to hear their story. Have you ever heard of Haunting? Starring Poltergeist.
That's already confirmed in the Genesis book.
There you go. You don't understand, this man loves that game. We did a Let's Play video on our channel of it.
So underrated.
And we looked up the old Sega Genesis and played it.
I actually spoke to the
updated.
I spoke to the producer of that game for the book. So if you guys want, I could give you some exclusive. I can give you the list of confirmed games for the Sega Genesis book if you're interested.
Oh, yeah, I'm down. I want to see it.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, so we got Sonic 2, Shadowrun, Shakan, Dungeons & Dragons, Warriors of the Eternal Sun, Buck Rogers, Countdown to Doomsday, Poltergeist, General Chaos, The Immortal, Normie's Beach Babel-Rama, Lethal Wedding, Populous, Ren and Stimpy Presents Stimpy's Invention, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie, Virtual Bart.
Ah, yes.
Earthworm Jim, Spider-Man, X-Men 2 Clone Wars, X-Mutants, Desert Demolition starring Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote, Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, Jungle Strike, Urban Strike, Goofy's Historical History Tour, Gargoyles, Little Mermaid, Lion King, Aladdin, PGA Tour Golf.
Virgin Interactive games in there too.
Yep. Coach K Basketball, NFL 98, Roger Clemens MVP Baseball, NBA Live 95, Triple Play 96, Skitchin, Hard Driving, Evander Holyfield's Real Deal Boxing, ESPN National Hockey Night, NHL 95, Pit Fighter, Primal Rage, Mortal Kombat 3, Vector Man, and Altered Beast.
I want to know some stories behind Primal Rage and those digital sprites. Some of the design choices they made in that game, they're just bonkers.
No, yeah, and Spider-Man, that's another one I would love to read about, too, because that's like my second or third favorite Spider-Man game. I don't know what it is. I love that game.
it's funny too because the developers of Spider-Man are American, but they had a huge love of Japanese games like Shinobi.
Yeah,
So they were trying to make a Spider-Man game feel as much like a Shinobi game as
they
possible.
did. That's the
Yeah,
thing.
that's
They
actually a
definitely
good
did.
point. Like, because that's actually what it kind of does feel like.
And
Yeah.
then what was the other game you said? Spider-Man, and what was the other one?
What was the one that you said?
Oh,
Well, I said Poltergeist and Spider-Man, but Poltergeist, we already know that's coming, so I'm like, yeah.
what's
So
it called?
lots of fun stories. So it's like even like Lethal Wedding is it's from Mega Cat Studios, and I'm not sure if you guys know who they are,
No.
but they make new games for the Sega Genesis.
Really?
Oh, like ROM hacks, like on a card, like they
Not a
repros.
ROM hack per se, probably like actual straight cards.
Well, they're
They
developing titles like with 16-bit graphics and putting them on Sega cartridges.
Yep.
That's awesome.
So
So Lethal
cool.
Weapon, Lethal Wedding is awesome. It's basically like a mafioso shooter with like it feels a lot like Zombies Ate My Neighbors. It's really cool. So that was a fun development story for that to
Get
get
a
in there
hold of
too.
those
So
guys that started work on the Akira prototype for the Sega Genesis. Have you seen that? I just love like the design style of that game. I would actually want to talk to those guys and know what like where that game was going to go. 'Cause it's like 5 mini games. Have you ever seen that like way that game's set up? It's like I wanted to know what the completed project of Akira would have looked like.
That's one of the hardest
They had
things
that cool
too.
first-person isometric, or not isometric, just the first-person view,
Yeah.
which I thought was cool. And like they tried to use like force physics.
Yeah.
If
It was
you
well
read
done.
if you read the first book, they actually talk about in Road Rash when they were pitching Road Rash, they showed EA
Clown Gang.
they showed them a scene from Akira,
There you go. Yeah.
and they're like, we're gonna make a game that feels like this sense of speed, this sense of like badassery and stuff. And EA is like, do it. So
Nice. Perfect pitch.
mhm.
Anyways,
So
Patrick, we'll
mhm.
let you go. I appreciate you joining us. Where can we find you on social media?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Patrick Hickey Jr. I'm at Twitter at ReviewFixPat. I'm at Facebook at Patrick Hickey Jr. One of the things that I wanted to say was my books are available like wherever fine books are sold digitally, like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Indigo. But if you want a really cool experience, if you go to patrickhickeyjr.com/books, or if you go to reviewfix.com, there's a little tab.
I'll also have a link in the description when I have this video up. So
Sure. If
yeah.
you order the book from me, I personalize it, so I'll sign it. But like, if you guys are from like Philly, I'll be like, "Oh, you a 76ers fan or a Phillies fan or whatever," and I put trading cards and stickers and all sorts of cool stuff in your book to like connect us.
People remember that stuff. I always do when I get an item in the mail. Like we are just talking about Walter earlier, Walter Day. You know, because you were actually, if you guys don't know, this man has got his own trading card. Patrick Hickey Jr. Wasn't it 2018 that you were inducted with Walter?
Yeah, 2019. In October, it was wild. It was just like I got a message from Brett Weiss, who wrote the foreword to my first book, and he was like, "Oh, they're gonna give you a card," and I was just like, "What?" And like, I grew up like idolizing all of these guys, like Billy Mitchell and like Jeff Peters and Perry Rogers and all these amazing players, and I've gotten an opportunity to interview a lot of them and things like that, and just to get a card, get a trading card. Yeah.
Forget about it.
So that's the
Forget
thing too.
about it.
I have like a stack of them. So whenever somebody buys the book, I put them in. I put a card in there and I sign it and stuff like that. So yeah. So
No, that's really cool. I wanted to bring that up because if anyone who's watched our channel knows we've done we did a review on the Walter's Superstars of Gaming series.
mhm.
Anyways, we'll let you go, Patrick. I appreciate you joining us. Everyone who came in and tuned in tonight, thank you for coming. It was a blast.
Absolutely. And, like, share, subscribe, anything you see there. So, absolutely. And thank you again, Patrick. It was a
No
blast.
problem.
And
Yeah.
I can't wait to read the Shooter's book. I want to know those Deus stories.
Absolutely. The only other thing I'll say is like everyone that's watching, follow me, talk to me. I answer everyone back. I love to continue the conversation.
I can
So
vouch for Patrick. You have an awesome social media account. I'm always engaging with it now. You post often enough, and I love retro gaming. And no two posts of yours are the same about it. You just go about every topic.
it's just stream of consciousness, like whatever pops into my head. So,
No, I hear you.
so yeah. So I love to connect with people. So
You
thanks.
guys have a good night. I appreciate you having on. We'll see you guys next time.
Have a great one.